It begins with a story, a whisper that became a legend that became a conspiracy, and a conspiracy that has haunted the edges of official history for over 80 years. The story is not just about a ship. It is about a moment when the laws of physics, and perhaps the laws of reality itself, were torn open. The year is 1943. The location, the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. The world is engulfed in the greatest conflict humanity has ever known. Victory depends on technology, on secrecy, on the race to create the ultimate weapon. And the US Navy is rumored to be working on the ultimate cloaking device. The subject is the USS Eldridge, a cannon-class destroyer escort. The goal, according to the legend, was to achieve radar invisibility, and perhaps even optical invisibility, based on a radical interpretation of Albert Einstein's unified field theory. They believed that by generating massive, specialized electromagnetic fields, they could bend light and radar waves around the ship, rendering it invisible to the enemy. This is the story we are told. Imagine the scene: the docks shrouded in secrecy, heavy cables running to the ship, massive generators spinning up, emitting a low, gut-vibrating hum that grows into a piercing whine. And then, a sickly greenish-gray fog begins to envelop the Eldridge. Not a natural fog, but an electric one, crackling with energy. Witnesses, sailors on nearby ships, would later report that the ship's outline began to shimmer, to waver, like a mirage on a hot road. And then it simply vanished. Not just from radar, but from sight. It was gone. The legend, fueled by the infamous letters of one Carlos Allende or Carl Allen to the UFO researcher Morris K. Jessup, claims the experiment was a terrifying success and an unimaginable catastrophe. The Eldridge, it is said, did not just become invisible, it teleported. It allegedly reappeared for mere moments hundreds of miles away in Norfolk, Virginia, before reappearing back in Philadelphia. But it did not come back right. This is where the story turns from classified science to pure body horror. When the generators were shut down, the fog dissipated, revealing a nightmare. Some sailors were violently ill, others were simply wrong. They were disoriented, seemingly insane, speaking of other places, other realities. And some were fused into the very metal of the ship, their arms, their legs, their faces trapped in the steel bulkheads, a grotesque monument to a failed experiment. The rumors continued. Sailors who would spontaneously combust, or who would freeze in time, or most terrifyingly, who would simply fade from view, becoming invisible and intangible, their voices calling out from nowhere before vanishing forever. The Navy, of course, has vehemently denied every aspect of this story. They claim it was a simple degaussing procedure, a method to make the ship invisible to magnetic torpedoes, twisted by time and rumor into a science fiction horror story. It is a hoax, they say, a tall tale. And perhaps it is. Perhaps the Philadelphia experiment is nothing more than modern folklore. But what if the story is true? Not in the way we think it is, but in a way that is far stranger. What if the experiment did fail, but not because it failed to bend light? What if it succeeded, accidentally, in bending something else entirely? Something far more fundamental. What if the Philadelphia experiment was not a test of physics, but an uncontrolled, catastrophic assault on consciousness itself? To answer this, we must leave the docks of Philadelphia and turn to a different kind of pioneer, a man who mapped the very machinery of reality, a man named Itzhak Bentov.
Itzhak Bentov was not a mystic. He was not a conspiracy theorist. He was a Czech-born Israeli-American scientist, an inventor, and a brilliant engineer. He held numerous patents, from biomedical devices to industrial components. He was a man of wires, circuits, and physical laws. He was, by all measures, a grounded and serious individual. But Bentov's true passion was the inner world. He applied his engineer's mind to the single greatest mystery of existence: consciousness. He wasn't satisfied with philosophical explanations. He wanted to know how it worked. What was the mechanism? What was the physics of the soul? His seminal work, Stalking the Wild Pendulum, published in the 1970s, was a blueprint of this mechanism. It was so radical, so precise, that its concepts would later be mirrored in declassified CIA documents, exploring the gateway process for remote viewing and out-of-body experiences. Bentov, it seems, had stumbled onto a blueprint that shadow agencies found very, very interesting. To understand Bentov, you must first understand his core concept, the wild pendulum. He proposed that our consciousness, our sense of I, is not a constant static thing. It is a vibration. It is an oscillation. Your awareness, right now, is blinking in and out of existence faster than you can perceive. Imagine a pendulum. It swings from one side to the other. Bentov said our consciousness does the same. On one side of the swing, we are here, in the physical, material world. We are in our bodies, perceiving reality through our 5 senses. We are perceiving the particle. But to swing back, the pendulum must pass through the center, a point of stillness. Bentov called this stillness the absolute, the void, the 0-point field. This is the realm of pure potential, the unmanifested ocean of energy from which all reality emerges. Then the pendulum swings to the other side. This, Bentov said, is the realm of the wave, the holographic universe, the cosmic information field. In this state, our consciousness is not localized in our head. It is expanded, out of body, connected to the entire universe. We oscillate between these states, particle and wave, body and field, billions of times per second. We are quite literally flickering. We only perceive the particle side of the swing, the physical world, because our brain acts as a filter, stringing these frames together to create the smooth movie we call reality. This leads to his second core theory, the brain as a holographic receiver. Bentov argued that the brain does not create consciousness any more than a television set creates the broadcast signal. The brain is an incredibly sophisticated biological antenna. It is a receiver that is tuned to a specific frequency, the frequency of you, within the vast cosmic hologram. The universe in Bentov's model is a single, gigantic hologram. Every piece contains the whole. Your consciousness is not in your brain. Your consciousness is in the field. Your brain is simply the mechanism that pulls down that signal and interprets it as a physical body and a physical world. Think about this. If the brain is a receiver, it means 2 things. 1, it can be tuned. This is what mystics and meditators have done for millennia. By quieting the body, by stilling the pendulum, they can adjust the receiver to tune in to the wave side of reality, the absolute, the unified field. But it can also be jammed. It can be disrupted. A strong enough signal, a powerful enough electrical field could overwhelm the delicate biological antenna. And if you overwhelm the receiver, what happens to the operator? What happens to the eye that is perceiving the signal? This is the Bentov bridge. This is the key to decoding the Philadelphia experiment.
Here is the central thesis, the Bentov deception. The great misdirection of the Philadelphia experiment is the belief that it was about optical invisibility. The legend has sent researchers and historians chasing a ghost, arguing over physics, light waves, and Einstein's equations. But the real secret, the one Bentov's work illuminates, is that the experiment was never about bending light, it was about bending perception. Let us look at the objective again, the unified field theory. Einstein proposed that electromagnetism and gravity were just different expressions of a single, underlying field. The Navy, in this legend, was trying to weaponize this theory. They were trying to create a brute force entry into this unified field. But what is the unified field? According to Itzhak Bentov, the unified field is not some exotic energy in space. The unified field is consciousness. It is the absolute, the zero-point field, the holographic matrix from which both matter, particle, and energy, wave, emerge. It is the source code of reality. The Navy, in their ignorance, was not building a cloaking device. They were building a consciousness jamming device. Now let's re-examine the experiment through the Bentov lens. The crew of the USS Eldridge is on board. The massive generators are activated. They begin to flood the ship with an unimaginable chaotic electromagnetic field. This field does not bend light. It begins to interfere with the human body's own subtle electromagnetic field. It interferes with the receiver, the brain. Remember Bentov's flickering consciousness? The oscillation between the physical world and the absolute? That blinking is our anchor to this reality. It is the stable rhythm that keeps our pendulum swinging in sync with the rest of the physical universe. The chaotic energy from the generators acted like a hammer blow to that delicate rhythm. It desynchronized the crew. Think about it. What is invisibility? It is when something is no longer in this reality. Bentov's model provides a mechanism. If the physical particle side of the pendulum swing is disrupted, where does the consciousness go? It is forced back into the other side of the swing. It is violently thrown into the absolute, the wave state. In this state, you are no longer a body, you are pure awareness. And in this wave domain, Bentov explains, time and space do not exist as we know them. Everything is here and now. It is the unified field. The Navy of Eldridge did not travel to Norfolk. They were subjected to a forced, uncontrolled, mass out-of-body experience. Their consciousness, ripped from its physical anchor, was adrift in the holographic field. In that ocean of all that is, their awareness, perhaps tethered by some shared military or geographic link, snapped to the frequency of Norfolk. They did not move through space, their perceptions simply jumped from one coordinate in the hologram to another. This was not teleportation. It was a catastrophic failure of conscious grounding. They had used a sledgehammer to knock their souls out of their bodies. And the true horror was not in the leaving, it was in the coming back. Now think about the implications of this. If an external chaotic field can do this by force, what can an internal field do by choice? Itzhak Bentov spent his life mapping this not for warfare, but for human evolution. He believed that by understanding our nature as a wild pendulum, we could learn to master our own reality. This is the core of our work here at Mystical Journey Tales, decoding this ancient and forbidden wisdom for the modern world. If you are finding this journey valuable, if you feel the resonance of these ideas, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell. We are not just telling stories, we are assembling a blueprint for awareness. Your support allows us to continue this vital work. Now let us return to the consequences of the experiment. The generators wind down. The artificial fog recedes. The Navy officers look on, and what they see seals the experiment's fate in infamy. Let us analyze the horror, one by one, using Bentov's holographic receiver model. First, the madness, the disorientation. Sailors wandering the deck, screaming, unable to recognize their own shipmates, their own hands. The Bentov explanation. Their receiver, the brain, had been fried. Imagine taking a delicate radio, designed to pick up a specific station, and blasting it with 1 billion volts of electricity. The circuits are scorched, the antenna is melted. When the jamming field shut off, their consciousness snapped back into their bodies, but the receiver was damaged. It could no longer properly interpret the holographic signal. It could no longer filter the infinite wave state from the finite particle state. These men were now perceiving both realities at once. They were seeing the physical deck of the ship, but also seeing the seething infinite energy of the absolute underneath it. They were seeing their shipmate, but also seeing the wave form of his consciousness. It was a sensory overload that shattered the human psyche. They were driven insane by seeing the source code of reality. Second, the most terrifying legend. The men fused to the hull. How is this possible? The common explanation is a failure of physics, matter blending with matter. The Bentov explanation is far more chilling. It was not a physical fusion. It was a perceptual one. When the consciousness is in the wave state, in the unified field, there is no you and the ship. All is one. The atoms of the bulkhead and the atoms of your body are part of the same holographic information field. There is no separation. When the consciousness of these sailors came rushing back, the damaged brain could not perform the filtering operation. It could not find the boundary between me and not me. In that moment of reconnection, the sailor's consciousness identified with the ship itself. Their I became perceptually locked inside the molecular structure of the steel. They believed they were the bulkhead, and the brain, the receiver, in its final desperate act, manifested that belief. They were not physically melted into the steel. They were perceptually trapped in it. Their consciousness was now broadcasting from the steel, forever unable to separate itself from the inanimate matter it was now locked to. It is an imprisonment of the soul, not the body. Finally, the sailors who would vanish or freeze.
This is the wild pendulum in its most tragic form. Their anchor was broken. The desynchronization caused by the experiment had become permanent. Their consciousness pendulum was no longer swinging in rhythm with the rest of us. It was stuck. A man who freezes is, in Bentov's terms, a man whose pendulum is stuck on the particle side of the swing. He is trapped in a single frame of the movie, while the rest of the film moves on around him. And the man who vanishes, his pendulum is stuck on the other side. He is permanently trapped in the wave state, the absolute. He is an out-of-body consciousness, a ghost, his receiver no longer able to pull him back into a physical form. His voice, heard calling from nowhere, is the echo of a consciousness that has lost its receiver. The Philadelphia experiment, through this lens, becomes a profound and terrible lesson. It was a warning.
The experiment was buried. The USS Eldridge was reportedly transferred, renamed, and eventually scrapped. The story of Carlos Allende and Morris Jessup became a footnote in the annals of the strange. And Itzhak Bentov, the engineer of consciousness, would die in a tragic plane crash in 1979, an event that, given the nature of his work, many researchers find deeply suspicious. So what is the final secret? What is the Bentov deception? The deception is the belief that power comes from the outside. The true forbidden science that was uncovered in 1943 was not a new weapon. It was the discovery that the human being is the ultimate technology. The secret is that consciousness is the foundation of all reality. The Philadelphia experiment represents the brute force approach. It is the story of humanity, in its arrogance, trying to use crude machines to hammer its way into the kingdom of God. It is the attempt to dominate the unified field, to weaponize the absolute. And the result was madness, death, and souls trapped in steel. It opened a door that it could not close. Whether the story is literal fact or a deeply symbolic myth, its warning is the same. The sailors of the USS Eldridge, real or imagined, represent the sacrifice made when we tamper with the foundations of reality without wisdom. They are the cost of knowledge without understanding. Their alleged fate, madness, fusion, vanishing, is not just a horror story. It is a mandatory lesson. We must learn from their sacrifice. We owe it to them to find the right way. Itzhak Bentov represented that right way, the path of resonance. He spent his life teaching that the unified field, the holographic universe, cannot be accessed with generators and cables. It can only be accessed from within. The key is not to blast the receiver with energy, is to quiet it. Through the stillness of meditation, through the mastery of the wild pendulum, one can learn to consciously and safely tune the receiver. One can learn to navigate the wave state, to access the holographic field, and to understand our true nature. The military wanted a ship that could become invisible. Bentov provided a roadmap for a human being to become infinite. The legacy of the Philadelphia experiment is a warning against brute force. The legacy of Itzhak Bentov is an invitation to resonance. The experiment showed us what happens when we try to break the locks on reality. Bentov left us the keys to open the door correctly. The choice, as always, is ours. Do we continue to build machines to control the world around us, or do we finally begin the work of mastering the receiver within? Thank you for joining this journey.